Morning, everyone. Well, I haven't played Ninth Age since my last game of ETC, so 3.5 months. Figured, with some new changes coming up, I might as well take a look at what's happening. As of this video, the KOE, VC, VS, the newer books have been updated. I'm not going to comment on those, partly because I don't really remember what they did, and I've never read the new Story and Ancient book, so I definitely can't comment on that. But I'm going to look at the magic since that's actually something that's very interesting. Um, and I'll just see if I have any first thoughts on it. Obviously, like I said, as it pertains to the new armies, and even like I've heard some rumblings because I think some of the druidism stuff was spoiled beforehand, and a lot of complaining, which very well could be warranted. But we haven't even seen how the books have changed yet. So if a druidism army was that needed it and the druidism got worse and then the army got better in a different way, then maybe it equals out. So take some of this with a grain of salt because, for example, warriors changes. I there's some changes to the lores the warriors have, and I'm curious how it affects them, but I don't know what the warriors updates are. So anyway, let's just go through the spell lores and see what changed and see if anything pops out. All right, so in alchemy, I'll make this a little smaller. What the come on, man? To get it all on one page. In alchemy, we got Word of Iron, another to cast, so it was 9. Now it's 10. It was 24 inches back in the day. A little bit worse. I mean, obviously, from a depth perspective, it got worse because I already didn't like casting it on 3 dice out of 9, and so now that 3 dice on 9 goes to the master. Um, I kind of get it. It's a very good spell, and plus 2 armor is really strong on some units. I'm sure it's not a huge deal. And there's some other things that we'll see later on that kind of help inherently alchemy. So the one being that will stick out would be the Dragonbane gem is now 3+ ward instead of 2+ ward. And so I think that inherently does help this lore a little bit, since obviously Lash was the big reason people took 2+ on their Cowboys. So 3+ you can fail 3+. I mean, if you do, I mean it's D3+1. You're doing probably D3 wounds to a model, can fail one easily, and ping at them. So I don't mind the Word of Iron. I mean, a lot of the times it's probably it makes it riskier on the 3 dice. No one really ever did it on 2 dice unless you were just desperate. Um, but 4 dice, it's still the likelihood of it going off is still very high. Like, it doesn't change the numbers that much, so I think it's fine. Silver Spike going to an 8 on the big version. Oh wow! So that becomes a much easier 3 dice on or 2 dice on a master, or 3 dice on a adept. And adepts can take this. So yeah, I don't know. It seems like with some of the changes, like the more aggressively like annoying, spammy like Lash, Molten Copper, Silver Spike, Alchemy type mages will be out there, and Alchemy can do a lot of damage. It's a very good lore, so I don't mind these changes. I don't have any super strong opinions either way. It's this 10 makes sense, and the 8 will make some stuff. It's not like something so major. Cosmo. Okay, let's see. So 2 changes. We'll do the divergence first because I know the truth of time is a little bigger of a change. So divergence goes from hit everybody to 6x6. Um, so that's big for 2 reasons. Obviously, when you have hordes of like 50 vermin swarm, hitting 36 from 50 is a big deal. But I think the bigger deal for this spell, honestly, is you can't hit the champions and the heroes anymore. Mixed with Touch of the Heart, for example, doing this to VES was really strong because they're usually res 3, res 2 on their characters. Hit all of them, do a wound to a mage. They're only like 2 wounds, right? And then you can pick them off with the snipe, or just do this multiple times. Now, or even champions. I mean, killing a champion was always a big deal. That was always like a big role too. And so now it's just here's 36 strength 3, and against a lot of things it's just as good, right? If you have a 5x5 elf unit, it hits the same amount as it did before, but without the champion. There's definitely a nerf to the spell for sure. I actually think the hitting not hitting characters and champions is a much bigger deal than the number of units you hit. It really is like, it also like protects units that go like super wide, like 8x2 or something. You hit a lot less of them. Like you hit 4 less, like elves or something. I don't know. So I mean, 6x6 is still pretty big. I think at some point someone mentioned 5x5, and I thought, oh, you know, if elves go 7x2, you're still missing 4 of them. So it's a pretty big nerf to it, actually. I think. Um, I'm curious if this lore, because this lore, like that was a good spell, and when it was good, it was really good, and when it wasn't good, it sucked. I wonder if people still take it. So people have been talking about the new Truth of Time and see what it does. So they got rid of all that annoying maximize, minimize, and people were like, well, if I'm supposed to strider with maximize, how many dice do I roll and what do I take, blah, blah. So now it's just +2, +2, and -2, -2. I mean, the one nice part about it now is the agility is a combat debuff as well. So before, you know, and I'm not saying it was bad before. It was fine before. I think it's always slotted into one of these spells of like, if you had Lore Master, people would probably cast this spell a lot. But since you don't have Lore Master, it's like, do I want to take a spell that might affect somebody's charge? You know, it has to be situationally like good, and when you give yourself maximized, right? Like people can just stay out of your range, and then maximize doesn't matter. But now that they added this agility layer to it, you know, now you can use it on your stuff as like think of it this way, right? You can cast it on your own unit, and now not only is your advanced race +2, which gives you a little bit more threat range, but you have +2 agility for if somebody charges you. And the opposite is true, right? If you charge somebody and their agility 4 and your agility 3, this all of a sudden becomes a great combat buff to where you go first, or debuff a hex in that case. So, yeah, I think both the advance and the agility part of it, at least it goes into combat, right? The other one was like, if they made the charge, it didn't matter if the spell was on them because it didn't do anything else other than make the charges more or less likely. And obviously casting -2 move on some units is just really impactful because, um, well, because it's just they can't get out of your arcs and stuff like that. Again, you know, as the player who has to cast a spell, since you move before you cast magic, you know, are you going to, if my unit has a threat range of 18, are you going to, well, I guess that's for another conversation about Warhammer and random charges. But are you really going to be like, well, I'm going to put myself at 14 and hope I get the spell off so it's 16? You know what I mean? Or are you just going to put yourself right above 18 and say, all right, well, you can't charge me anyway, so who knows? We'll see what people do. Or if people take it, like, again, now with the agility part, it's actually probably more worth it. If it didn't have this agility part, I actually would probably say it's like kind of mediocre, mainly because of what we just said, where people like you don't know what's on them during your movement phase, and again, the same is true the opposite. The enemy knows you're +2 advance during their movement phase, so unless you're in a position where like they can't get out of your line of sight or something, they can just not go as close to you, and then it doesn't really matter. But maybe we'll see it more. I mean, we need to see the spell before. I mean, people took it sometimes, but it had the problem of, you know, there's other spells that do more things that are more universal. So why take Truth of Time? All right. Divination. All right. The only change here is they changed the last spell to MR3 for everybody. Again, I like the reduced complexity. You know, if you look at some of the spells that were like got removed, like they're just kind of weird, like things that you don't really see. Like you don't really see double maximize type things. This is just match resistance 3, and it's universal, so you can cast on enemy units because it applies to their spells. I don't think it's a bad spell. I am curious as to the same thing as with Truth of Time almost. Is like, do you slot this in, right? Because like if you cast it on an enemy unit, one that wants to get buffed, do they just buff something else? Right? Now, of course, if they have some Death Star that's going to charge something, it's really annoying. But you are, like, in a sense, trading dice in a way, right? Because you have to cast this spell to make their spells harder to cast. And this is a 2 or 3 dice spell depending on if you're a master or not. 2 dice for master is still 6 is pretty. It's not guaranteed. And MR3, like the 3 on the magic resistant, is basically like -1 dice. So you might be trading 2 dice for 2 dice on theirs, but it also makes your dispelling easier. So it's not totally 2 dice for 2 dice because yes, maybe I need to roll 3 dice instead of 2 dice at my spell as the enemy, but now you dispel it as a 2 dice spell, right? So the die just kind of goes away. I guess maybe it's trading dice. I haven't done anyway. Like people can play around it to some extent. They just don't like if you cast on your own unit, like unless it's the only unit that can be hit by the enemy spells, um, then you just go at something else, right? So it's gonna be interesting. I think again, good spell. I think in and of itself, it's very interesting. But I worry, like if you're against something that's pretty Unending Strike and Face Judgment is good against, you're going to take those 2 spells, and then you're kind of looking at this lore and saying, well, I mean, the other buffs are like really good, right? Stars Align, Scrying, Know Thy Enemy. Are you really going to take a spell that might make you better? Like it doesn't naturally do anything by casting it in combat, like right away. If they want a 5 dice a spell in the combat, sure, and maybe it gets it harder for them. But if they're like 2 4 dice buffs, this might not break the bank on that. And so then are you stuck with a spell that kind of sucks? Maybe it's situational. It's a cool spell. Whatever. We'll see how people use it a lot. I could just see it not being like taken that often. All right. Druidism. Oh, I've heard so much bitching about this. So let's see. So they definitely made it simpler. I mean, it only has 2 spells that are even boostable, let alone is that even like common? How many? I feel like lores have like way more boosted spells. Like, this is like super simple. You can cast from 6 inches of any forest, water, or hill. So they made that easier in a sense that instead of like, oh, it's the hill for the stone skin and it's the water for the regen, which thematically made sense. It's just here's the 3 features and we can cast from all of them, which covers a lot of space. I mean, forests and hills are very big on boards, and I don't have a heat map, but I'm imagining you have a pretty good amount of range with most of these. So the hidden pass targeting Strider as it's a pretty good attribute. Probably better for obviously KOE, since a lot of like Beastmen and Elves are already Strider a lot of things, except for maybe like walls for chariots. So it feels a little misplaced there, other than it being really good for KOE to be like, hey, my big lance is just Strider. Let's just see what they changed. Found the Youth. So now there's a heal. Did they remove a spell? I don't even know. There's a spell that got removed. What was the 6th spell? I guess the 4th spell, and they just turned their attribute into the number 1 spell. So a 5+ to raise 1, but you get the Strider thing. I guess like getting Strider is like actually pretty good on some things, to where like because raising 1 health point for 5+ seems real shitty, right? At least to me. Yeah, that seems real. Is that just a bad like? I mean, it's cool on a character, but like even the Cosmo version is 24 inches. I guess it's a 7+ for the Cosmo version. Maybe it's better than I give credit for. Like 1 wound, trading 1 wound for 2 dice ish. Okay. And 20 roots is what it was, right? It's like the same thing. Though apparently it looks like it's different. I don't know why it's all green. Yeah, the whole lore is different. Healing Waters. I mean, this seems like a pretty shitty spell, right? 6+ Fortitude for 8. I mean, +1 armor is a 5, and like, there's the one that gives like the 5 up ward save, which is better. What are you casting this on? That I don't know. That doesn't seem like good. It seems like too high to cast. It's worse than it was before. Master of Earth got better. It's very low range, but obviously you have all the terrain pieces to cast it off of. It's only 7+, and it's 2d6 strength 4, AP1. It's pretty nice. Stone Skin, there's the big one everyone's complaining about yet. It was one of the best spells before. It was just like one thing they've done in this document, at least it seems like, is a lot of the spells you'd hear stories about like being super game changing and super like, oh my god. They've definitely toned them all down a little bit. Now they haven't removed them completely. They haven't been like you can't do this anymore. But as we go through it, you'll see that like it's not as like bad as it was. Like right, like here, like the melee on 5 up is not as bad as. Sure, it's melee only. That does kind of suck. It's a 10, but in crucial combat, that's still really big. It's also kind of nice that like it's just a flat like 5 plus. One, it's easier, but two, like it's better versus like really high strength characters. For example, like if you're getting the great weapon 6, 7 type guys, like this is better because unless you were, you know, resilience 6 or 7, even then it didn't like right unless you were getting the 6 or 7, so you would have to be like 4 or 5 base, depending. I mean, a lot of people did stop like the Oaken Throne. If I'm strength 7, you got to be res 8, which means you have to be res 5 to start to even be equal. So this is a lot better on like the res 3 stuff because you were getting to like 5 before, and if you're getting the 5 before or 6, like this is still better if the people are like 5 strength or something, right? So it definitely is better sometimes. It's more streamlined. I'm fine with it. I think it's fine. Um, Friendly units within 6 of the target point raise D3. So you put it on the ground and then D3 for everybody, 1 with Tyrant Presence. Good for knights, better for knights. I mean, this is the big thing too, right? Like where unless you have a lot of monsters in this area that are all wounded, and I mean, if you have that, it's gonna be. I mean, you can heal a lot. Like if you get a bunch of single models and they all took like a wound or here or there, this would actually heal like a lot. Healing knights for a lot is like annoying. It's that whole thing where healing two, what are they called? The little beastmen guys. Healing 2 peasants, or was I the KOE guys? Healing 2 peasants versus 2 knights, though it heals the same rate, is like requesting. It's a very big deal. And so this incentivizes you to take those, like maybe the units of knights or things that are a little bit bigger, that they're more points per wound. Again, as a lore, I, I'm not going to say I like it as I think it's strong. I'm also not going to say I think it's bad. I think it's the biggest change of any lore. So it's kind of like, okay, well, let's see what it does. Let's see how they change the books themselves to kind of the books that use it the most. So we'll give it a chance, but it does feel less like annoying than it was before. I mean, from a complexity standpoint, if I'm going to be, it definitely has helped a lot because the whole Oaken Throne mechanic um, being gone, I'm not going to. I don't think it's a horrible thing. A lot of times, you forget about it. But, a lot of new players would forget that enemy had it, and they could easily dispel it. It's just kind of like here's a lore, and maybe they got to do some tweaks to some spells to make them a little better or worse. But I appreciate what they did to try to change it and make it more whatever they wanted it to be. The risk they took. Evo, they just swapped Spectral Blades and Ancestral Aid. I've mentioned before that I thought Spectral Blades could have been a 5-6 spell, and Dance could have been like a 4 spell. But I think this is a good, this is a good start because one, not only I don't know actually how many Proteans out there have this, to be honest with you. But I know it was one thing where like one, it's a big deal for Proteans that used to have it, now going to Ancestral Aid. But two, the bigger one is just you can't buy like a 125 point apprentice and like 5 dice Evo to like win the game. You can still 5 dice Spectral Blades. If you're an adept that was taking it, it doesn't hurt you. But at least they made adepts more expensive. It took away the Book of Arcane Mastery for plus to cast. So there's a lot of instances of, oh, you know who it does hurt? I think I don't know how the demon book looks, but the demon Protean bitch, the you know which one? Her. She used to have this, and that used to be really annoying. But as I said, getting rid of the Book of Arcane Mastery and making this have to be an adept definitely limits like how impactful. Like people will still 5 dice if it's the best, but at least it's either on a more expensive person or it's not on a +2 to cast person. So I think this is a great change. Occultism. So what did we change here? There's like two things changed, right? I think it's just grave calls. Oh yeah. So everything pentagram was pentagram moved from 4. All right, so it's just grave calls. So it moved it to 18 inches, but you only get the +1 if you're within 12. So naturally, this is a buff because there's only like a couple instances where it's actually worse. So because before it was 12-inch range, and now the target was within 12 inches of the caster, +1 strength, +1 armor pen. Sure. So now you can cast it from a little bit farther away. Gives it a little bit. The range was always an issue. Well, it was funny because we talk about how range being an issue with occultism, but it really wasn't, right? 24, 24, 24. This can as an 18-inch natural built in. So it's 11 plus to cast. And 11 plus for 2d6 strength 5 AP2 is not really like, no one's writing home about that. I mean, the big people always sacked and was going for strength 6 if they could. And that was really, I think, the most powerful part. So I don't hate this because from 18 inches and 11 plus is like, that's a lot. It's not easy to get this off. At least now you can cast it like turn 1 and 2, and yes, you don't get the +1 strength, +1 armor, but armor pen, but at least it feels like you can do something with it. Otherwise, maybe your lore felt a little worse there. I don't know. But the two of the biggest users of this was probably heralds and the vampires that had like the extra range shit, whatever that's called. And so it's funny because it makes the vampire version a little worse, in my opinion, because before the vampire version could cast at 18 and get the strength. So now they've traded that they can cast at 24 inches, but they can't get the strength at 18 inches. So I think it makes it worse because obviously the vampires were usually a little bit more like wanted to be back farther, so casting it at 18 inches was more annoying. And so now that, it's a glorified 2d6 5 AP2, if you're casting from that far away, you probably feel a little worse. But on the other side, the Herald also casts it a lot. But the Herald can only take it if they take the Veilwalker upgrade. So now you got to assume the Veilwalker's in there. And you could say the same is true. Oh, now the Herald, can only get +1 strength at 12 inches, and they were casting it at 18 inches a lot with a Veilwalker. But as somebody pointed out in the Discord, and then once I finally ran some math, against a lot of targets, like you can now turn that token that was 18 inches range to +6 into reroll a wound or reroll armor. And mathematically, depending on the target, it's almost better or the same. So let's just take an example. Would be what's a defensive 6? No, Gortak. Let's just take a Gortak for example. And you're sitting at 18-inch range. If you're sitting at 18-inch range, before you would just cast extra range and sack somebody, right? So it was 2d6 strength 7. It was, who cares how many hits you get because the math is the same. You wound on 4s, so it's 1/2. Okay, well now you're going to wound on 5s, but you can turn that token and you can turn it into reroll to wound. And so the armor doesn't matter because they have no armor. And so 2/3, the chance of failing twice on a 5 is 4/9, so the chance of getting a 5 rerollable is 5/9. 5/9 is better than 1/2, so it's actually better than it was. A Gortak at 18 inches is better on a Veilwalker than it used to be. And I think that's true for some things. I think when you get to a 4-up save monster, it leans back into the favor of being strength 6, and obviously if you go lower, it gets better. And then there's all these things there, right? Like you could say a 2+ character, you really want the AP because a 2-up save, a 5 versus a 4 is much better. But now you can, if they're res 3, like an elf, you can just do reroll armor saves and it probably becomes better. I haven't done the math on like every combination, but overall, the one big thing I guess you could say is why it's better is because a lot of times you sometimes didn't have a token for extra range. So now at least the ability to cast it without a token at 18 is kind of nice for a Herald as well. So it's funny because I feel like it only kind of hurts that one vampire build. Sure, like you can now cast at 24 instead of, but like the fact that doesn't scale with it and they don't have something to supplement like the reroll Veilwalker, it actually is kind of funny. So I actually like this change. You got to be close to make it really impactful, but now like those two items, the +6 range and even to some extent Veilwalker, like The big downside of this spell was range, and there was a couple armies that could take advantage of it and get better range. Because even didn't one of the VS things gave it extra range, like the bell or something? Could you do extra range grave calls with the bell? If you could, then this is probably even better on top of that. So it hurts all of them from that perspective. All right, we're keeping going. Ember is the same thing as before. Same reason that it kind of sucks now on the Cosmo. I actually think it's a big nerf. Like that's one of the ones like people see the 6x6 now. It's the hitting the champions to me that seems even bigger. Sure, for the unit, if they had 50 models of slaves, you 14 missed and you wound them on threes, so 10 wounds. Sure, you probably missed kill slaves, but not killing champions and like characters, I think it's really obnoxious. So they changed this to just be -1 to wound against melee or both. So it's like potentially better stone skin, depending. So if you have something high defense, it's like a better stone skin for cheaper. Huh. It's pretty funny. It's a good spell. I don't think it's again like I don't know. I haven't played in a while, and I've always been kind of like if somebody and I don't take a lot of shooting in Magic. I take like heralds, obviously but I don't take a lot of range when I play. So maybe I have my perspective is a little warped on this kind of stuff because I don't have that perspective of do you cast a lot at the same thing? Because sometimes in my mind, at least when I played other games, if somebody was to like make me hard to shoot something, I would just shoot something else and say, all right, well, you spent a lot of effort to make this one particular unit really hard to shoot. I'm just going to shoot something else, which is why spells like things that hit the enemy shooting I liked more because then I cover all my bases. You know, in this particular instance, if they had a target 1A and target 1B, I can't cover both of them, so the spell almost becomes useless. But now I kind of like that. You know, this lore has now two buffs, debuffs, whatever you want to call it, two combat-ish or even whatever spells, shooting spells still that aren't just straight like I do some more strength 4 hits. It feels like you know if you went into maybe a bad matchup for the lore Feldrix or something, at least you have two spells, and if you have, I mean, this isn't great versus Feldrix, but let's just assume like they were just a one-up armor save army. It feels like you have at least, if you have a good hereditary and you take two of these, you're maybe stuck with one like magic missile for chaff or two men, and then you're not feeling like, oh my god, all I have is missiles versus like one-up saves. Might need to change the cost or something, but I appreciate it. Not bad. Shamanism, they made Totem 1 easier to cast, and they took away the breath weapon from it. I actually like this change. I think it's a very elegant's probably the wrong word, but it it was weird how good the breath weapon was when what should be good is just summoning a fucking not fearless, a random mover behind somebody's army. Summoning like a free model that like comes up from the board edge is already strong enough. Let alone the fact that you could sometimes spike and like kill a bunch of things or just have 2d3 extra hits in 2d6 extra hits in combat. I mean, it's already 4/5 attacks. I mean, if you're really worried about the damage output, give it an extra attack. I don't really think it needs it. But you could have made it like not have the breath because it's like all in one, right? Like it's like I'm going to chaff you, and I'm going to be annoying because like if you have a cannon, you kind of have to deal with it. But like on top of that, it was like still so good that you could like come up behind like a Waywatcher unit, and they're still called Waywatchers, and just breathe. They're called something else, I think, and just breathe on them and kill like 4. Right. So I like this. I think making it a little bit easier on the on the base one is more acceptable. I really like this because this is one of the best spells in the game, and weirdly, one of the reasons it was so good is because you could like basically put a breath weapon like anywhere around the board edge, and now they took that away. I like this change a lot. I really think. Oh, no, this doesn't matter. They just changed some wording. Or overrun. Oh, okay. Did they change overrun to be a different move now? It's not like a special pursuit move. Maybe that's why. Oh my god, Dom. This is just clarify that you roll 2 dice. This is the same. We'll get to speaking tongues after we look at the rest. So the two big changes here: speaking tongues became a new spell, and wrath got nerfed. Okay, so let's just look at speaking tongues first then. Yeah. So they took away the two versions. It's not the BSB bullshit anymore, which is probably good for like the VS bound item or the whatever does it. So it's a leadership test, gains fearless, and you shake it if you fail. So if the, I guess that's, and it's kind of good on chaff, right? If you think somebody's gonna flee, like they're both bad, right? Either you can't flee or you can't move. If you come shaking, you can't move. You can't overrun. It's actually the heck you can do it in combat. Interesting. I'm trying to think when it would be like. Thing is, you don't know if they're gonna pass or not. So like, it's not like you could charge somebody and you think you're gonna lose, and you can like cast it on them and hope they fail, and then they can't pursue you, or like a backup to that where you could say, "I'm gonna charge you in order to risk not dying. I'm going to." When does shaking come off? Is shaking? Is it like a timing issue here? Anyway, it's, I don't know. We'll see. Again, it might have the same problem it always has. Like, are there just better other spells to take? Like, usually, like when do you take this spell? Maybe it's very specific. But that was always the problem with like the speaking in tongues, truth of times, port, and whatever that spell was called, number 6 from Dev. It just was. It's a cool little spell, but you have to sacrifice something by taking it, and that's just the truth of it. Um, I don't know. I have to. That's one that you have to kind of see in the game. I could see some uses for it, but the whole people are so good at, not people, but discipline is very good in this game. Like most people have rerollable nines and stuff like that. So you're basically giving an enemy fearless, and then depending on where the enemy unit is, they can just set it up so they don't. Like a lot of chaff doesn't always flee. Like a lot of chaff just says, "I'm gonna die," because if you flee, you get a redirect. So is it really that good? I don't know. Okay, wrath. Nothing happens, but no counter. All right, so they basically took away the counter mechanic. So basically, it's just 2d6 range all the time. So it used to be 2d6 plus one. So they naturally got rid of plus one range, and then it never goes up more. It just comes down or does it. I like this from a complexity standpoint because it means you don't have to count how many tokens and be like, what turn were we on? Oh, I failed this turn. Blah 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 blah. But it takes an average of probably 2 or 3 inches off the range of the spell, and when you're talking about a radius spell that's a 12 to cast, like it can be a big deal. Like it definitely gives you the agency to move away from it, and then like it can, it takes away also that like if they roll a 12, they get me. Like it really does reduce the range of it a lot. And then the fact that it never gets bigger, it never becomes. It's also nice for like the enemy side where it's like, oh, it fails to go off 3 times, all of a sudden my shit's in range. I think this is, I like this change. Again, Wrath of God is one of the most impactful spells from like an AD perspective. Like a lot of people just sit there and cast it into your corner or into where you are, and they can still do that. But now it feels worse. It's an inch less range. Like there's a lot of times where I'm like, I'm gonna, if you space your stuff out enough, it can't hit a ton of things unless you're really bunkered in like a corner, and then you're like, fuck you, you deserve it anyway. Again, I love like this and like the is there another spell that changed it? We'll keep going, then we'll talk at the end. Raven's Wing or this. Okay, so there's some changes in. Is this the last lore? Then we got magic items. Man, I gotta speed it up. Can't talk about this forever. I like that they took away the sweeping attacks. Not just from like I didn't think the sweeping attacks was too powerful or anything, but it always like a lot of people ask questions about it. It was like a complexity thing, right? Like it the spell did a lot. It gave you a magical move, gave you fly, gave you light troops, and now it gave you a sweeping attack. And then, oh my gosh, what if I cast on somebody that had a sweeping attack before, and now I have to clarify that they can do both sweeping attacks? And so just say fuck it, get rid of the D6 Strength 4, and let's just make it what it is. It's a movement spell. And then they do a big one, they lose scoring, and that's actually really, really, really big. Because this spell was, there was a lot of games that came down to like, I'm gonna 5 dice Ravenswing on my last turn to win the objective. And the objective's worth a lot of points. And now you can't do that. And that's really huge. Period. That's just period how big it is. And even before, even like Ravenswing onto a spoils, you can next friendly magic phase. Wow. So well, that makes sense. So it's not even the end of the turn. Because one thing it was the end of the turn, like you don't get a count for hold the center. But you could for spoils about an example, like right, you can get on spoils and then you can't get on like now you can't if you Ravenswing onto a spoils mark, you can't pick it up the next turn. That makes sense. I mean, otherwise you never affects your spoils. It really, yeah. I thought it was just for other things, but you can't do it for breakthrough, right? Ooh. It's, I mean, it's still a great. It's a good spell, but I kind of glad I kind of took the and people complaining about this versus the Evo one or yeah the Evo move. I do think it's one. This is on the number one spell, so a lot more people have access to it, and I think fly is also a bigger part of it than like the other one. Like a lot of times, it's easier to get there with a fly light troops move than it is just a 12-inch move. So sure, maybe the other one should not give scoring. I don't think it's as big a deal, especially since it's a mash require. This is like I could take an apprentice or depth and 5 dice at the last turn and get it. So they've nerfed the casting values of this, which I mean it was a good spell and did a lot. Maybe it was too cheap. Maybe it was too much given that they already crapped on Raven's Wing. And Will's turns again from a complexity thing, one of the most asked about spells because it was kind of annoying to like it's really hard to read this spell before. Melee attacks against the target. It's universal, so you can cast it on both people. So it's melee attacks. The boosted is 8 if always hit against the target. So because before you could do some weird thing where you're like in a big fight and like they get 4s to hit you and 4s back. So now I guess it has been kind of worse, right? If you're but it works on characters now. So now you can use it 2 ways. You can either say, I'm going to use it as a defensive spell where like somebody was 2+2+ versus you, and all of a sudden they're 4+4+, which is -2/-2 is huge, and especially if you're getting like gangbanged by a bunch of things. Or use it the other way where you say, all right, I have a lot of attacks, and you're like defense resilience 6, and I'm going to now do 4+4+. It seems fine. I mean, it's casting value's low. What were they before? I don't remember. All right. It's more or less complex, similar results. Yes, it's not as good in the ultimate case, which is where you cast it on somebody's big block and you have like Skaven spears or via spears, and all of a sudden you go to 4s and then he goes to 4 and 4s. Now you have to pick one of them. So maybe it hit the lore in general a couple times, but I don't know if it like destroys the lore at all or anything like that. It still seems pretty good. I do like this change. All right, so that's all the magic. So they really did like you can think in Will's turns you consider was like a big spell sometimes. Raven's Wing, Wrath of God, Totemic Summon, Druidism, Stone Skin, and to the lesser extent Spectral Blades because they didn't change like any dynamic of how it works. They just changed who can get it. Yeah, they really and obviously like Answer Rate is way worse than Spectral Blades as far as like a number one. It makes total sense that these are switched, in my opinion. Like, they're still there. They haven't taken away all your toys. They haven't said, no, you can't comment somebody or you can't summon this unit. They just shaved something off of it where they're like, listen, you don't need the breath weapon. Use it without it. It's already a chaff piece / kill some shooting piece / be annoying piece as a spell. Or, you can still drop your comments, but we're not going to make it come down 15 inches. Stuff like that. or you don't have to count them anymore. And you can still, here's a spell that moves a unit. It just moves a unit with fly. You don't get the sweeping attacks, and there's a downside to it that sometimes matters and sometimes doesn't make a difference, right? It really matters for like the last turn, like I'm going to go into the center type shit, which I'm okay with, because I think most times you're not like you're you're using it for that like last turn, got to win the scenario type thing, and so now you can at least prep for it, and it's not like they scoring to score was the most used Ravens wing thing in the game at the time. It's usually like monsters and wraiths and stuff like that. um yeah, and then they tried to make some of the lesser taken spells, speaking in tongues, truth of time, number 6 day, they tried to make them a little more tasty without being as like complex as they were before, because they were kind of like I appreciate some of the simplicity stuff they did in even like this one being, some of the worst offenders was like double sweeping attack questions. This one was, the wheel turns was definitely the most asked about one. Keeping track of Wrath of God tokens. Yeah, I am happy with their change. I don't have too much opinion on Druidism. Yeah, cool, cool. It almost makes you want to play again. Not really. Um, let's quickly go through the magic stuff. I don't know what that means. They basically just said attack enchanted weapons are magical attacks, so they can take it out of like every single weapon saying it. She got the and. I don't know if it matters. I don't think this conceptually changes anything. So blessed inscriptions went from divine reroll the wounds to just reroll the wounds, and they took away some points from it. I think they call it something else. Eldritch inscriptions. Ooh, dumbass name. Potentially dumbass name. Yeah. I mean, it was a really good enchantment. It was like the most taken, right? It was just so good on like a great weapon and stuff, because you're just like, all right, I'm strength 6 or 7. I rerolled a wound, so helps from spiking low. And if you're against somebody that's like res 5 or 6, at least you get them all through on average, or a lot of them through. And if you have like Destiny's Call, you just get fucked. Yeah, this is really good for models with ward saves, since a lot of people won't take it anymore. And they make Cleansing Light like have the Divine Flaming on demand, so that's pretty nice. This one like helps with saves, but you don't have to use it, and it doesn't have any other natural like good thing, right? If somebody doesn't have regen or a ward, sure, if you have alchemy, you get flaming attacks, but like it doesn't, like Cleansing Light was like super niche, and this one at least divine is better. They moved it across. So now like there's some good items out there, don't get me wrong, but nothing like save the really like strong weapons for the books, right? Like the Pordons, blade, burning blade, and stuff like that. I don't think this is that bad. I'm curious, like the people who took it before, what they take now, or if this is ever used anymore. Like, is 40 points really worth reroll to wound? It was what, 60 before, or was it 65? So is what's divine worth? We'll see. No changes here that I see. They removed Rending Banner. Interesting. I never played it because of just the army I used. It's probably nice to not see it. I mean, 1-up save characters, big knight units probably benefit from not seeing it as much. Units of spears and units of like Blackguard, Obsidian Guard with like AP 3 and 2. So it's probably a good thing. And like even like a lot of all the core of Skaven used to take it a lot just to be more annoying. So it's probably helps like Cav a bit. I don't know, this idea that like there's some complaints that like units really needed it and now they don't have it, but it was like core spears and stuff like so your fucking slave, or not slaves, couldn't take mana. Your unit of spears, I don't know, in your core can't fight 1-up save knights as well as they used to. Like, big fucking deal. Like, you have other things in the army that can do it, right? Maybe it naturally helps knights. I don't know. Running Mans were popular, and you have to spend the points on something else now. Um, with, but they also, it would probably be a little bit better without the basalt. They made Dragon Beam Gem 2 3++ now, so you could say, oh, one up save rerollable characters were a big issue, but now they've kind of nerfed them if you have alchemy and stuff. So, here or there. It'll be interesting to not see it. I'm really curious what their reasoning behind it was. Of all the beta, it makes okay. That's fine. I'm not gonna go to Binding Scroll 65. Fair. They could just make it 0 to 1, make it dominant, make it 50, whatever. The fact that like now it kind of cuts off 2 on the same hero, which I actually kind of down with, because now it starts like really start impeding builds as well. Like I'm pretty sure it won't fit on my chariot guy that I used to run in Warriors, but 65 starts to become like it's two things with points, right? When you point magic items, you have to point them. There's two things they affect. One, they affect how much you spend on it. Is it worth 65 points? That's probably the big question, right? Second question is it kind of like hurts builds. So a lot of times you saw these on like a random combat character, like just putting in a binding scroll and just saying, fuck it, here's my binding scroll. It's really strong spell. And so now fitting in 2 is not only 30 points more, which is not a ton of points, but it's like, where do you put it? You can't take an adept with 2 of them and stand around. You can't, maybe it ruins your combat build if you throw it on your fighty guy. So there's definitely moments where this could matter. I still think they're very powerful though. But also with some of the top end spells getting a little bit worse, like comments and stuff, maybe you don't need 2 as much, and like there's no stone skin anymore and stuff like that, or big stone skin. You know what I mean? Book of Arcane Mastery gives you, so they basically changed it from backing away from +2 to cast and then getting you an extra spell. So you can't take it on a. It's kind of, somebody mentioned it, and it kind of makes sense. Like it kind of does feel like it's just a different magical heirloom, but I get it. Kind of like the magic heirloom that you can only take your hereditary and you can take only master, which a lot of people already do. So like from an adept perspective, it's like, do I want an extra 1 2 3 4 or do I want an extra hereditary? Oh, you can't cast her. So you like the Book of Arcane Master like takes away your chance to take the hereditary. So if you have a bad hereditary, maybe it's good. What else? All right. Sorry, I had to walk away for a second. So I just talked about these. Yeah. Okay. Well, again, not as interesting. I think removing +2 cast is, I think, a very good thing. I think it limits these adepts taking a good spell and 5 dicing it, or like even the whole +2 to cast VS crap. So I'm fine with that. I mean, people wanted magic. People have claimed that magic has been too cheap and too good for what it does for a long time, and so they've made 2 big strides of one, making adepts and masters more expensive, and now they've gone and toned down some of the best spells and combos with like just spamming dice and stuff like that, or spamming +2 cast and 5 dicing things. So now they make binding scrolls more expensive, but also they were like a no fun thing too, right? In its own right, where you spend 100 points, you take 2, and then you just shut down the person the biggest, and it's like a crap to play against sometimes. Yeah, so that's cool. Lightning Band Braces, I saw somewhere they did something with it, right? They made it 20 points. I forgot what it was before. 20 points for small hand, maybe that's not worth it. You can do some low magic setups with like this, right? If you have a pretty shitty hereditary and you take like a adept of, I don't know, Evo, and you get 1, reroll to hit, reroll to wound, and whispers, that's 3 good buffs. And if you don't need your H spell, then fuck it, who cares? And I saw the 3 plus. I'm surprised that they didn't change the points of Dragonfire Gem. They just made it worse. And so now for 20 points, you get +1 armor, which also feels really good, considering that for 15 points, you get +1 armor and have a negative, pretty big negative next to it. So maybe this is a better deal now. 3 up is still pretty good. I mean, let's not be lie. But it also doesn't make you like immune, which was just like annoying for people who took like flaming manners, or which you can still through good. Burning Porton's back, baby. Burning Porton's coming back because now that, because 3 up is like failable, right? Like if you get hit by a Burning Porton, you're still scared of shit to like, if you're like a 1 up save elf, you're like, oh, if I fail one, I could just die. 2 of up was a lot more annoying. They're dealable. I'm curious. I'm going to assume so that a lot of the 2++ versus flaming is going to 3++, and they don't want 2 up in the game, 2 boards. So that'll be really interesting if like all the armies change, like the griffins and stuff like that. Maybe full circle. Metal's back, baby. Alchemy's back. It was already a really good lore. Now it's totally back. Did they change anything else? Let's just go. Let's just quickly read through this and see if I lost anything. Mirror Veil, Graves, remove Rending Banner. Oh, they removed Titanic Might. Oh, I didn't notice that one. Wow. Oh. Okay, here's the points. Okay. Word of Iron went up, Spike went down, Truth went up, Mirror Veil. Wow, they removed Titanic Might. I think that's fine. I think that item was like weirdly like really good on like Sylvan Elf characters or people with naturally high AP, which I don't even know who else there was. People did take it sometimes on like Strength 5 stuff with AP2 just to like fight monsters. I'm down with it being gone. Fuck it. It was like a weird one. It was just like because honestly, like if you think about it, it now it's kind of like a glorified or a different depending on ending. It's like a better or it. Sorry, let me rephrase that. It's a different Eldritch inscriptions, right? So it was more expensive, but essentially it was just made you wound better. And Eldritch inscriptions. Oh, what a dumbass! I don't like that name. Eldritch doesn't really roll off the tongue. Is basically reroll a wound. So let's just do some quick math. If you were, I mean, does it matter? Strength 4 versus res. I mean, the other one was probably better in that case. Maybe it makes Eldritch Inscriptions more useful since before Titanic Might, like +3 is basically +3. So now if you wounded on 3s versus 2s, so 3s were rollable is better than 2s. There's a point where like rerolling a wound is better, I guess. Like if you needed 5s, no, because 5s went to 2s. Yeah, I guess Titanic Might would just be more useful in a lot of cases because they took away the divine part. Or if you were already a strength 6. Like reroll a wound would be better on high strength items, characters with like great weapons and stuff, and then +3 strength would be better on like the AP2 people that are like strength 4, like Sylvan Elves, or maybe even 3 with the blades. So I'm fine with the change. I'm fine with that change. It kind of overlapped the way it did it. Again, I think it's fine that I don't think the common magic items need to be all that crazy. Like they shouldn't be the most taken items in the game. Well, sorry, that's let me rephrase that. They should be the most taken items because they're common and everybody can take them. But like, you should go here and say, oh, okay, I need something for my character. I want a Kingslayer, or I want this or that, as opposed to Blessed Inscription is the best item for my character, even as opposed to all my book items. And I'm okay with it being separated and putting the powerful items in the books themselves, like the armies that really truly should have them. So I'm overall I am pretty outside satisfied. Again, I'm not playing right now. I'm not going to use this, but if you showed me this and I was in the shit, I would be like, yeah, I'm down with it. Down to see what it changes. I don't know what all the book changes are, and we still got books to be released to change. So you got to kind of view it as a complete package. But as of now, and as of like here are some things we smacked on, like it's going to change some shit up, and I appreciate that. Not only from a big spell perspective and how people approach like a lot of the spells that were like built around or like really impactful that you hear about or have now been toned down. Nothing's really been toned up. They've added some new spells, but I don't think there's anything groundbreaking in the new spells personally. Still the problem of like, do you take it versus the other spells? But Arcane Mastery, another annoying thing down, Binding Scrolls up, so it kind of mixed up the magic phase. Some of the most common banners and items are now hurt Dragonbane Gem in its own right. Rending Banner gone, the 2 magic items gone. Though the Tiny Light wasn't seen very often, but where it was seen, it was really good. So, maybe Sylvan Elves, slight nerf to Sylvan Elf there, right? A lot of people use it on their characters, though. not always. Um, and then we'll see what the books bring. I like to see them doing sweeping changes. You know, I've heard rumors of like some big things changing in like Warriors, and I'll probably do a video on Warriors themselves because that's the army I played. Um, and I'm down. I'm down to let's shake things up. I think it's a great for the game, and I'll record another video where I talk about what I'm doing now and what I'm playing. Um, and while I think this shake up, my final commentary will be I've never really had a huge problem with a lot of like the stuff in Ninth Age. I do dislike a lot of range stuff. So while I appreciate the shakeup, I still don't think it's like I don't feel like I'm going to come back and play anytime soon. But it's not inherently like Ninth Age is bad or anything. But I'll have another video talking about what I'm doing now and what I plan to do. But thanks for listening.